Hello and welcome to Imaginations project from the UMAC Futures. My name is Zhao Ke from the Electronic Science and Technology Museum, University of Electronic Science and Technology of China in Chengdu, Sichuan, China. I am also working as the co-chair of the UMAC Futures, which is an organization of young scholars from university museums around the world. In Imaginations project, we make online talks with young scholars from different universities, from different countries and districts to listen to the voice from the future, to follow the imaginations from the future. It's kind of the description and observation of the current image by the young scholars to re-image and reconstruct the university museums after the pandemic. We hope it bring more energy, hope, and vitality. In the past several months, we have interviewed 5 speakers and posted the videos on UMAC websites and YouTube channel. Today, we are gonna talk with a speaker from Australia. Let's welcome Holly Millward. Holly is an intern and a volunteer in Macquarie University History Museum, Sydney, Australia. She is completing a Master's of Asian History at Macquarie University. And we met in UMAC annual conference this year. She made a very wonderful presentation about pottery there, which I was so impressed with. So could you please say hello to the audience and give us a brief introduction of yourself and your institution, Holly?
Hi, everyone. I am in Sydney, Australia. I'm currently a student at Macquarie University, but I was fortunate enough recently to do an internship and volunteer within the Macquarie Museum. So that's where a lot of my experience comes from. The Macquarie Museum has recently been renovated into a whole new building. It has combined both ancient and modern history into this new form and flow that you can see all history in one space. It has 18,000 objects and it goes from 65,000 BCE all the way up until the 21st century. But it's also a research and a learning space for students and the public.
Okay, yeah. Thanks, Holly. I'm so familiar with Macquarie University History Museum because of Andrew Simpson. We met in 2018 and we are good friends. Sometimes we just talk about the research and some papers. Okay, so it's so familiar with you and your institution. And we are so glad having you here today to share your research, your ideas about the university museums. We have just 4 questions for you. And there are 3 questions. They are general questions. And the first one is like a relay question. So let's get started. The first question is, what is the specific project or program you are working on right now and why?
So what's interesting is I'm currently in the middle of obviously finished a project and not quite starting the next one. So the pre-mentioned Esna pottery internship that I completed in 2020, that was part of my undergraduate degree where you're given the opportunity to do an internship. So with my supervisor, the museum director, Professor Martin Bomis, it was summarized as looking into various museums in Australia that had been given Gustang archaeological pottery in 1905 from the University of Liverpool in England. When they were sent here, they weren't given proper records, they weren't labeled, so they were kind of discarded and not put on display in Australia. So the importance of this project was to look into them, categorize them, find what Egyptian tombs they come from, and just overall study them. A lot of the pottery was on loan to Macquarie a few years ago. So we had a lot of the records already in the database for me to look at. And a few of the others was in Queensland Museum in Australia. So there was 76 total pottery found. We found a lot that had not been recorded at all. And then at the end of that project, which I created a video, which was then at the UMAC conference in September, which kind of summarizes all those topics. So that's kind of what I did a few months back. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Holly. It sounds a huge work, right? Because you have to start from the scratch and to a whole creation. And is it a traveling exhibition or just a settle down in the fixed point?
I think what's interesting, is the pottery that was in Australia. I wasn't, as a Sydney person, I wasn't aware that we had such an abundance of Egyptian pottery. And so when I found out that they were basically in archives, not in display, is because no one knew about them and no one had actually studied them. So they didn't know what to do with those objects. So I think that's why this is important, because now they're like, oh, there's something to talk about those objects. Previously, there was nothing. So yeah, it was just in archives, essentially.
Yeah, it's great. And it reminds me of our connection, because we have 15,000 objects in our museum, in our storage, but most of them are unknown before 2015, because we prepared the museum from that time. So we do know nothing about them. It's similar. So we have to start from the scratch, and it's difficult and a challenge for us too. Yes. Okay, let's move to the second question. If you are creating an exhibition, I think it's that exhibition, right? What object do you want to collect or display most related to the past 2 years experience? So it's like an imagination.
Yeah, I think as a history student, I've been around the museum even before it was renovated, and the Macquarie Museum has a lot of history objects and stuff. But as Australia, we don't have access to the classical world as much as like a European museum might. And so I think putting objects on display that are from classical or ancient times is probably really important for Australians to see those kind of objects instead of going to Europe or something like that. So when I did the ESNA project, there was 2 vessels that we focused on that was related to a stele, which is an Egyptian inscription, with individual names on it. So it had people's names from that time. And I found that 2 of those pots from Queensland Museum was connected to that. So that means we can identify that person had that in their tomb when they were buried, or personally owns that during their lifetime. So I think if the Macquarie Museum was able to get a loan for those objects and create an exhibition out of that, I think that would kind of help tell the story of, I guess, student research, student involvement in museum spaces. And also historical context for objects that might not seem that important in the scheme of artifacts. They might be like, oh, it's not, it's just a plain vessel, but it's got all this history behind it as well. So I think those kind of objects, that object can show research and skills and what's currently going on in the Macquarie Museum. So yeah.
Okay, thanks, Holly. So it's kind of, you are making connections from this object to that object, and they reflect the whole history or background stories, right? So that's what we historians do, right? Okay, thank you. And let's move to the third question. When the COVID-19 is completely gone, and we hope so, what do you want to do most related to university museums?
I actually can't wait for the museum to be open to the public. It was previously open to mainly university students and staff, so the public haven't really seen it yet. But I can't wait for that to be fully open and people can see Macquarie as a space and the artifacts we have. And I also can't wait for students to use the new facilities that are in there, that you can scan objects now, you can fully immerse and study those objects. And also temporary exhibitions, like was mentioned before, like being able to collaborate with other museums, bring in objects, have people visit the exhibitions. I think just that kind of environment that will be open once COVID's, yeah.
Okay, so Holly, you just want to go back to the reality world, right? And let everybody in. Okay, we hope so. We hope so. In our in our campus, we opened the museum, but it's just for the teachers and students and some professionals from outside of the campus. The public, most of the public, they cannot enter the museum now. And yes, we hope the COVID-19 is completely gone soon. Okay, so the last question is kind of the relay question. I call it question in a bottle, sort of message in a bottle, right? The question from the last guest speaker, Ayumi, she is from the Intermediate Take, University of Tokyo, Japan. And the Intermediate Take, the museum, Andrew Simpson has been there, and we talked a lot about it. So Ayumi asked, what is a good design for museums? And please tell us the idea based on your experience in university museums, like give an example, okay?
I really liked this question. I think there's a lot of ideas that can be put out there, and there's a lot of diversity in the way museums like to present their objects. I think as a consumer in attending museums, there's always things that stick out to me as that was a really good idea, or that was well managed in the way an object was presented. I think in the time that we're in with high tech and we have so much technology and visual media, I think we can utilize that a lot. So whether that's, more videos being involved, or I also think the idea of sound and using sound in a museum. So whether with history, whether that's replicating the sounds of life that would be occurring while you're walking through, or even language, people speaking the language which those objects are around. And I think just being interactive and immersive, making it so any age group or any knowledge level can enter that space and understand it fully, or leave and be like, that was a fun experience kind of thing. So I think those kind of ideas is kind of what I was thinking of what makes a good museum, that it sticks with people and that people learn from it as well.
Okay, get it, Holly. It reminds me of the museum of the Ayumis, the Intermediate Take in Tokyo, because their museum locates in the center of Tokyo, and the University Museum and the Tokyo Post Company, they cooperated to make that museum. They have a sound environment system in their museum, and it's like customized for each group. Just now you mentioned each age of groups, right? And so when you walk into the museum, the gallery, you may think the museum is just for you. It makes you unique. So yes, I agree with that. And technologies, right? But for now, somebody is against technology. How do you think of that? Yeah. Because we have more technologies, 3D, AR, VR technologies, and maybe in the future AI. And how do you think of that? How can we control the advantage and disadvantage of the technologies?
I think it's interesting because history museums haven't changed a lot over time. They're pretty consistent in having objects, having labels, the history behind it. Every so often you see an exhibition that's gone beyond that. There was an exhibition I saw a few years ago that was a Pompeii exhibition. and they had floor to ceiling screens, and it played the eruption as it was happening in Pompeii, and people felt as if they were there at the time. So I think history is a space that, you know, can use more visual media in its immersion. Yeah.
And in my opinion, I think that we can use technology to make something alive, to make the objects alive, to make history alive. And of course, on the other side, we have to keep some space and keep the temperature of the technology.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So it's a relay question. And what is your question to the next speaker? And we'll tell him or her the question.
So the question I came up with was, how can university museums continue and ensure to be places of learning, research, and cultural exchange for all people, with this growing issue of authority figures dismissing and removing humanities and arts? So that's kind of my question in the current climate and news around humanities and how important they are and stuff like that.
Wow, that is a good, great, and big question for all the colleagues in university museum community. I don't figure it out for now. So okay, we'll pass the question to the next speaker. Okay, so it was really a fruitful talk with you, Holly. Thank you so much, and
Thank you.
And of course, thanks to the audience. Hope they enjoyed and join us next time. At last, I would like to say UMAC Futures, we are coming. That's all from me today, and see you next time.